Okay, well, welcome, folks. It takes a while to start letting everybody in. So we're letting folks come in. But as we do that, I just want to welcome you and say thank you for making the time to join us this morning to learn more about the impacts of extreme heat on our students and our school communities, and to understand policy-based solutions that can be implemented here in California and beyond. So welcome. And my name is Andrea Goyen, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at 10 Strands. And I've served in a number of roles as an educator, including classroom teacher, site level director of sustainability, and also a county environmental literacy and sustainability coordinator. And in each of these roles, I've really seen the direct impacts that climate-driven extreme weather events can have on students' ability to learn and play. So I'm really excited for today's policy forum to learn a little bit more about this topic as well. And again, just want to say thank you to folks for taking the time to be here. I'm going to start us off by sharing a little bit about what our agenda will look like in our speakers, and you can see our different speakers. Actually, Stephanie, will you go back just one second? You can see our different speakers here on the screen, and I'll just do a real quick overview to what that focus will look like. So as I mentioned today, our focus will be on extreme heat, and this has become a real growing problem for California schools. So we're going to first hear from UCLA's Dr. Kelly Turner, who's an associate professor of urban planning and geography, and also the associate director of the Luskin Center for Innovation. And she leads the Luskin Center's research on heat equity. And so she'll be presenting first on her research policy brief and fact sheets that will detail some solutions for protecting Californians with heat resilient schools. And then we'll follow up Dr. Turner's presentation with some timely policy-based solution information from the co-founders of Undaunted K-12. So first, Sara Ross is going to share a little bit of an overview of the new federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, which can be used to help schools adapt to extreme heat. And she'll be sharing a little bit about how to leverage those funds. And then Jonathan Klein will be sharing other policy ideas to mitigate and adapt to extreme heat. So yeah, if you want to go over to the agenda slide, thank you, Stephanie. So I just wanted to give a little bit of logistics as we get this started. So in particular, I want to remind folks that during the presentation, the audience will be muted. So just please stay muted. We'll have you type any questions that you have in the Q&A box. And so we'll take those in and then we'll hold them until the end. And then the last thing to just share is that this webinar will be recorded. You probably got that alert as you came in, and there will be a recording sent to everyone who registered, including the resources that go along with the presentation. So just a big thank you also to our promotional partners as well for this policy forum. And again, we're really excited to have you here. For the folks who are just coming in now, I'm Andrea Goyen. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at 10 Strands, and we're going to be focusing here on extreme heat. You can also see in the agenda that, as I shared already, the different speakers that'll be touching on each section, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So like I said, we'll be collecting the questions, and then at the end, I'll moderate our panelists to share some answers to some of those questions. So please don't hesitate if you have any questions to pop them in the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to be turning it over to Dr. Turner to get us kicked off. Again, Dr. Turner is the Associate Professor of Urban Planning and Geography at the Luskin Center, and also the Associate Director of the Luskin Center. And she's going to be sharing first about her research in policy brief and fact sheets. So over to you, Dr. Turner.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm excited to share with you some of the research that we have been doing on extreme heat, which is part of an extreme heat policy brief at the Luskin Center for Innovation. We're an environmental policy and planning research center that focuses on stakeholder engaged collaborative solutions to environmental challenges. And so the work that we're sharing is part of a policy brief series, the most recent of which was published, and you can use the QR code there if you would like to, or the link in the chat box to access it, on protecting Californians with heat resilient schools. This work was funded by the Resources Legacy Fund, so I just want to thank them for the research and engagement support, and also point to the 5 overarching kind of recommendations that came out of that report, which I will go into in a little bit more detail later on. Next slide. So what's the problem with hot classrooms? Well, for some students, school might be the only time where they get a place to cool off during the day, and children spend a lot of time at school. So especially students who live in really hot neighborhoods, they might not have access to cooling, and schools already have a legacy of providing resources to those students. Next slide. Another issue is that study after study is starting to show that when classrooms are too hot, children's learning suffers. For instance, one particular study that came out of our research center showed that without air conditioning, every degree hotter a school gets, test scores go down by 1%. And those effects are amplified in low-income and communities of color. Next slide. So a question that remains is how cool enough is enough to support children's learning and well-being? Well, we do have some places we could look to, like the California Child Care Facilities Act, which puts that maximum temperature at 85 degrees. There's a law in Arizona that requires classrooms kept under 82, and the Illinois Department of Public Health recommends 79 degrees. But in general, for ideal learning conditions, the classroom needs to be somewhere under 80 degrees Fahrenheit before learning starts to suffer. Next slide. But children also need time. Sorry. Okay. So there are many ways to cool hot classrooms. I just want to briefly highlight that this could involve things like passive cooling, like cool roofs and shading. It could involve cooling equipment. So that could be air conditioning, or it could also be more energy efficient technologies like heat pumps. And then also building retrofits like insulation and double pane windows are helpful. And the trick is finding ways to support this through finances. Next slide. One of the problems with hot schoolyards is that children need time outside to support their learning inside, and they need it for their well-being. So on hot, sunny days, schoolyard surfaces can get really, really hot. Grass gets hot, but asphalt gets hotter. And we've designed most of our schools to have a lot of asphalt. And even things like rubber matting or artificial turf can get hotter than asphalt and cause burns. Next slide. One of the problems with hot schoolyards is that playing in the heat can cause a lot of health problems, but on the other hand, kids need those health benefits of outdoor play. It translates to academic benefits. Next slide. And what we recommend is that shading outdoor spaces is the best option. And so why is that? So if you focus on surfaces, which can get exceptionally hot, like asphalt, changing to something like grass can make that surface feel cooler, but only by a little bit, only by maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 degrees. But shade can cool down way more. So whether that's a tree or a shade structure, you can see up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit difference between being in the shade and being in full sun exposed conditions. And that's using a composite indicator for the net thermal burden, or how the human body experiences heat from air to sunlight exposure, et cetera. Next slide. And the good news is that almost any vertical object can provide shade. So for instance, trees can be a great option because they provide many different benefits, but they may require some water maintenance and time to grow. So you may not see the benefits from immature trees for a while. Shade sails are great, but there may be some permitting issues, although we did have a recent piece of legislation passed here in California to make that a little bit easier. And then also considering designs that include courtyards and multi-story buildings. Buildings are actually one of the most efficient ways to provide shade. Next slide. So what can the state do? One of the things the state, hi, sorry, we're having a little toggling back and forth. So I wanted to say that one of the important things to do is to reconsider how we design our playtime for children. We have designed in California in our public schools really asphalt heavy systems based on an asphalt heavy definition of play. So things like basketball or handball, but play can look really different. And green and sort of more nature-based solutions can provide students with ways to recreate that are maybe not just sort of one definition of play, one definition of athleticism, and also provide lots of different benefits environmentally. Next slide. Okay, so what can the state do? One thing we really need to do is start tracking information related to heat management much better. So for instance, we don't know how many school facilities have access to air conditioning, if the air conditioning units operate, and if the schools can afford to run them. This is a problem. and needs to be solved. There's other important metrics that can be identified, things like understanding conversion from asphalt to greener space, and collecting qualitative data in partnership with school staff, teachers, parents who have the firsthand experience of what it's like to be on these conditions. And also consider using existing systems for data collection, like the school accountability report card. Next slide. Another thing is to understand at what temperature the classroom should be limited to. So for instance, developing standards for indoor temperature, but also understanding that schools might need some support to have the retrofits to make efficient and operationable indoor cooling, and also to fund both installation and operation. Next slide. Also, the state can support and facilitate nature-based and engineered solutions to reduce heat in schoolyard. So one thing we would recommend is prioritizing funding in the schools that are in disadvantaged communities, remembering that this might be one of the few opportunities that students have for high-quality outdoor play and for cool indoor conditions. Also, identifying ways to increase shade and prioritize shade on campus as opposed to surface-based changes. De-asphalting and depaving is a great start, but we need to emphasize protecting children's bodies from direct exposure to sunlight, which is the primary way a body heats up and becomes unwell outside. We also need to think about studying legal and other barriers that prevent schools from installing shade. This is one of the biggest sort of things that we hear from schools that we talk to, is that there are numerous barriers and reasons why not, when everyone agrees that it is a good solution. Next slide. We can also figure out how to not just change the actual infrastructure inside and outside, but also how we can address behavior and management. So consider maybe having an emergency heat plan to decide what you're going to do at schools when conditions are too hot outside. Also considering ways to guide these plans and what temperature thresholds activities should be modified or canceled. So there's only so much you can do with things like shading at a certain point, especially under climate change and heat seasons, extreme heat weather shifting further and further into the fall. It could be very true that extreme heat conditions extend into November in some parts of California. And also creating educational materials to educate about the risks of heat. Next slide. Finally, finding some long-term funding. We're going to hear a little bit about exciting opportunities now associated with the IRA, but finding ways to either use existing programs and expand them, or finding existing funding mechanisms for school and reorienting them to prioritize climate adaptation and heat mitigation. Those are things that the state can start to look into. Removing barriers for maintenance and repair, prioritizing energy efficiency. There's so much we can do in terms of looking at existing funding and patching in new legislation where it's necessary. Next slide. And to learn more about this, and a lot of the information that we provided here, you can follow the QR code on the top left that goes to our Heat Resilient Schools resource kit. We have fact sheets and infographics that are prepared for different sort of social media and sharing and engagement activities. And then on the right side, the QR code will take you to our Heat Equity Initiative at the Luskin Center for Innovation, where you can see all the various studies and resources we have available. And feel free to contact me directly as well if you have any questions. So again, I want to thank you so much for your time. We only got to scratch the surface of what's in these policy briefs, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Turner. Your presentation was extremely informative in that short amount of time, and I do hope that people really dig into those policy briefs to see some of those details. I also know we're really short on time, but I just wanted to share that the majority of our solutions that we're going to hear from Undaunted K-12 will focus on buildings and indoor solutions for high heat, with some stuff on the outdoors as well. But an initiative that we at 10 Strands are a part of that's really relevant to some of the green schoolyard information that Dr. Turner shared is the California Schoolyard Forest System. So this is a partnership that's led by Green Schoolyards America and was co-founded by GSA, CAL FIRE, the California Department of Ed, and 10 Strands. And so I know many folks on this call are familiar with this initiative, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat about trees and shade. And so Jonathan will share some policy-based solutions related to this at the end. But if you're interested in learning more, actually, Stephanie, if you go to the next slide, I'll just share that you can find a lot of these details. The Green Schoolyards America has done a really amazing data research to go along with, what Dr. Turner was just sharing about needing more details. Green Schoolyards America has done a little bit of that data work. And then the next slide as well, really the whole purpose of the California Schoolyard Forest System is to directly address that issue of shade and trees on public school grounds and to protect students from high heat. So if you're looking for more resources on that, there's just a wealth of resources on the link that I put in the chat box. And there's some great recordings of webinars for that as well. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. And that's going to be Sara Ross, co-founder of Adonta K-12. And Sarah's going to be sharing a little bit now about how we can leverage the Inflation Reduction Act to mitigate some of these high heat issues. So over to you, Sara.
Great. Thank you, Andra. And thank you, Dr. Turner, for your presentation and your awesome work. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. I will say I have a massive spoiler alert for you, and that is that several weeks ago, a decision handed down by the California Public Utilities Commission massively undercuts this federal funding opportunity for California schools. But let's start at the beginning, shall we? The Inflation Reduction Act is no doubt well known to many of you as a massive piece of federal legislation that seeks to accelerate our transition to clean energy. In many ways, the IRA represents our new industrial policy in this country. It is focused on expanding the benefits of clean energy to workers, to domestic manufacturing, and to our municipalities, including our schools. You can see this piece from Ed Week about this opportunity. And this is why I spend most of my time these days talking with state policymakers and agency leaders, district leaders, and others in educational ecosystems about how the Inflation Reduction Act funding can help us improve our school infrastructure in ways that enhance resilience, reduce costs, and safeguard student health and learning, all important topics for us here today. Next slide. So what specifically does the IRA, as we call it, support? Well, it actually supports many of the technologies that are part of the solution set that Dr. Turner just highlighted. First, heat pumps, a highly efficient technology that can help us cool our school buildings. The IRA offers up to 50% off the cost of these critical machines in our schools. The IRA also defrays the cost of solar so that we can operate our heat pumps and cover our other electricity needs in our schools using low-cost, fixed-cost clean energy. Third, the IRA defrays the cost of battery storage so that we can keep our clean energy machines, like our heat pumps, operating when we have outages. This is really important. We know there will be more power outages and more hot days. As we heard from Dr. Turner, school may be the only place where kids can cool off and reliably get a meal. So having solar and batteries at our schools means these buildings can serve as those cooling centers and as places for our most vulnerable students and community members. The list goes on. The IRA supports electric school buses so that kids aren't breathing in dirty diesel fumes on their way to school. And the IRA will also help us pay for the EV charging equipment we need to power those buses. So hopefully you're getting the sense that the IRA supports a powerful quintet of clean energy technologies that we should be deploying in all of our schools. And specifically for this conversation, it's important to understand that the solar combined with the storage, those are the key ingredients for resilience. It's that duo that is going to create the source of reliable, clean power for our California schools. Next slide. the clean energy tax credits in IRA are so very powerful and, unlike other federal dollars that schools have experienced before. These are some of the features that make them so exceptional. First, they are non-competitive. So any school that installs qualifying technology is eligible for these tax credits. And again, they are big, up to 50% off the cost of a ground source heat pump system. Schools are going to receive these tax credits as a cash reimbursement. This is a new and novel mechanism that the IRS created and the IRA established through the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is a really exciting new opportunity for schools to take advantage of tax credits. This money is available over a long time horizon. We have until 2033, even later, for ground source heat pumps, for schools to access this funding. And lastly, this funding, believe it or not, is unlimited. There's no cap in the legislation. There are no annual appropriations that are required for this funding. So putting all these pieces together, what this really means is we can build a strategy around how to maximize these federal dollars to really improve our school buildings. So just how many dollars could that be in California? Well, here's just some quick back of the envelope math. If just 1% of California schools every year installed heat pumps, solar, and energy storage, 3 of the technologies where we can get federal tax credits, that would be $4.5 billion federal dollars to do the work we know we need to do anyway in our California schools. So that's kind of just to size up just how massive this federal funding opportunity is for this work. So that was the happy story I was looking forward to telling all of you today. And then something happened a few weeks ago, as I warned you early on with my spoiler alert, at the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, that massively undercuts this opportunity. The CPUC changed the rules for solar on schools and some other building types, some other sites. But the gist of it is that this change means that instead of saving money when they go solar, which is the overwhelming reason why any customer chooses solar and the only way really to justify solar in the context of tight school budgets, schools would have to pay more for solar energy. This decision is particularly painful and misguided because we know that solar schools provide a net benefit to our grid because of when they use energy, how they use energy. So what will this decision mean? Well, it will mean certainly that schools will have to pay more for electricity than they would have paid if they installed solar. That's a bummer. These higher costs for electricity will slow down the transition from our legacy fossil fuel-based HVAC systems to modern all-electric HVAC systems that we need. So again, working against where we know we need to move. And it will leave our schools without those key ingredients that I talked about earlier for resilience, that solar plus storage combination. So we would expect to see higher learning loss due to outages, smoke days, extreme heat days. And that says nothing about, frankly, even the health consequences, the medical costs of lost wages associated with having students exposed to these dangerous conditions in our schools. So we see the Inflation Reduction Act really as a huge opportunity for California schools that today looks like it's been really undermined by the CPUC decision. And frankly, teeing this up or framing this as $4.5 billion of lost federal money, that's really only the most narrow fiscal frame through which to understand the devastating impacts of the CPUC decision, for our schools and for our students. I will say this is still pretty fresh, and we continue to connect with practitioners in the space to understand what fixes we might be able to implement. There may be some contortions we may be able to manage in some circumstances. But if we really want to go after these federal dollars, really to help California taxpayers get their fair share of these IRA dollars, at least for our schools, we may have to explore something like a carve out for schools within the CPUC's recent decision. Sorry to be the bearer of this bad news. We'd love to talk with those of you who want to learn more about how the CPUC decision impacts California's ability to capture IRA dollars. And we'd love to learn from those of you who have thoughts and experiences to offer. as we navigate these, unfortunate developments. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited for your questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And we have some questions that are starting to come in through the Q&A, and folks, just please use that for your questions. That would be great. But now I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Klein, who's going to share a little bit more about the opportunities for state action and leadership through some policy-based solutions. So Jonathan, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andra. And thank you, everyone, for making time for this conversation today and the opportunity to share some ideas with you all. These are a first set of ideas that we've been working on with partners in the Climate Ready Schools Coalition, and we look forward to, I'm already seeing questions in the chat that could help improve and expand on some of what we're going to share today, but looking forward to the conversation. So what should states do? What should we do here in California? And just to kind of recap our context, it's getting hotter. Children's health and learning is at risk. Sarah just talked about new, unlimited, non-competitive federal dollars that would, move our infrastructure in the right direction around health, equity, and decarb. We have a state law now committing us to decarbonization by 2045. The recent decisions at CPUC that disincent solar at schools, and in a context between local and state dollars, we are likely to continue spending 8 to 12, sometimes $15 billion a year on school buildings. And all of this, and you may have seen this last week, in the context of a historically dismal budget forecast for the state. I think the latest projection was that we have to address a $68 billion budget deficit. So that being said, we are aware of that context with the budget, and we think it is imperative, it is incumbent on us to treat the experience of California students in classrooms and on school grounds as an emergency. So with this budget brief and these ideas that we're sharing today, we're aware of the deficit, but we believe that these targeted and modest investments can make a difference to California students' well-being and learning, as well as California's bottom line. I also want to just acknowledge the diverse audience of district leaders, advocates, and policymakers, who are on the call today. And we hope everyone will work together, with each other, with us, in 2024 to strengthen and push these ideas forward. So we have 5 recommendations. I'm going to talk through each one, but the overall framing is that people need help. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to do, navigating new technologies and preparing school buildings and grounds for this new reality of extreme weather and extreme heat. We need new kinds of plans at both the district and state level. We have some existing fundings which some existing programs which are addressing these issues that need funding. And there are some relevant bills that are going to be moving in 2024 that we all should be paying attention to. So I'm going to talk through each one. Why don't we go to the first recommendation? So the first recommendation is around technical assistance. As we've shared, there is a lot of learning around some of those new technologies that Sara Ross was talking about, with all of the different nature-based solutions that we think schools, we should be moving toward to green our schoolyards. There is a need for more technical assistance and capacity building on how to care for those yards. So, and there's just very complex, to get these projects done for students. District leaders are navigating federal dollars, state dollars, utility incentives, grant programs, local dollars. And so more assistance could go a long way. So the brief goes into more detail on all this, but we're putting forth 2 structures or ideas. One is a one-time appropriation for a 3-year program to have a climate resilient schools person at each of at county offices of ed in each of the 11 regions of the state. So for 3 years. The second idea is to create a learning community sponsored by CDE and DSA, modeled on the Federal Energy Class Prize, which is run by the Federal Department of Energy, which provides technical assistance to school districts nationwide. But we think a California version of such a community could be important, given all the specifics of California law, regulation, and funding programs. And welcome others' ideas to build on, like, how should we get people the help and the learning opportunities that they need to move in this direction. Next slide. So the second idea is we need better plans. In this post-pandemic era of extreme weather, school districts need support with a new kind of focus within our kind of historic facilities master plans. And that's around indoor air quality and electrification, in line with that goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. Schools weren't built for extreme heat or this dangerous air quality during wildfire seasons. So in addition, we need proactive plans, because a major part of how we will achieve these goals is through end-of-life replacements. We're not going to have all of the money up front, but when it's time to replace a machine, we need to make a good decision. And those kinds of moments often happen in emergent situations. So when a system like a gas furnace or a water heater needs replacing, we need plans in place that help us understand sort of the associated costs or technologies or trade-offs. So we can, we've already done our best thinking to guide us in making prudent and aligned decisions, even under challenging conditions. And that's what good plans do. So we're going to drop a link in the chat to an example, indoor air quality and electrification master plan for a small school district with 6 schools. And we think that the state should invest in developing more of these kinds of plans, with some kind of grant program to create models among early mover districts that others can follow. So it's not just local districts that need plans. Let's go to the next recommendation. So this is a recommendation that a broad coalition of folks has been supporting for over a year now, which is for a statewide master plan for climate resilient schools. And this recommendation builds on the push from SB 394, which made it to the governor's desk this year. And we want to just take a minute to express a huge appreciation to Senator Lina Gonzalez for authoring SB 394 and all of the bill's co-authors in the legislature. That was Senator Josh Becker, Assemblymember Lisa Calderon, Senator Dave Cortese, Assemblymember Al Maritsucci, Senator Susan Rubio, Senator Henry Stern, and Senator Scott Wiener. The bill made it to the through both houses and through all the policy committees on the floor. It received a 114 to 1, 114 votes yay, 1 nay vote. It had a support recommendation from Democrats and Republicans, and just an enormous thanks to all of the advocates who worked throughout the year, traveling to Sacramento, calling into committees, and working to organize and gather signatures and endorsements for this idea. Unfortunately, Governor Newsom vetoed the bill. And in his veto message, he cited that the $10 million in estimated one-time costs were not in last year's budget. And he also expressed concern about the cost pressures that the plan might illuminate or would illuminate for future state budgets. And we think the costs of inaction are even greater. Those significant expenses are not going away, especially as we see more extreme heat, flooding, and wildfire events. So, we are going to be spending these billions every year. We can either spend it, in alignment with our goals for, extreme heat, adaptation, decarbonization, or we can spend it haphazardly and without a solid plan and without an eye to a strategy around making the most of these federal incentives that Sara talked about over the next 10 years. A master plan process could also help us get handles on some of the data about heat management in schools and to develop temperature limit recommendations as Dr. Turner talked about in the first part of this policy forum. So we are making a recommendation acknowledging Governor Newsom's veto message, and we're asking both the governor and the legislature to put this plan in the budget this year so that communities can spend their dollars more wisely in alignment with our goals for students, health, learning, and a livable climate. So if you're an advocate, we hope you'll add your name to the letter to the governor and the legislature supporting this master plan. And if you're here from the legislature, as it is with all of these ideas we're socializing today, we hope you'll reach out for conversations about how to move these recommendations forward in 2024. Why don't we go to the next slide? So the next two recommendations are around two existing state programs that are relevant to these issues. CalShape is a program that originated with AB 841, authored by Phil Ting, which authorized a program which uses energy efficiency savings dollars from investor-owned utilities to fund HVAC and plumbing upgrades and replacement in schools. In the budget brief, we recommend extending and expanding this program. Ideally, we would extend it through 2023, the timeline for the Inflation Reduction Act, so that we can work to maximize and align the program with that federal opportunity. The brief also highlights some statutory changes that the legislature should consider that would allow all California schools to benefit. Right now, the dollars come from the investor-owned utilities, and you can only qualify. A school can only access funds that were provided by the service, if from the IOU for which they are in their service area. And so that not all schools are in an IOU service area, and some of the pots of money that were created have already been expended. So we recommend taking a look at the eligibility criteria. Also, for some of the plumbing upgrades, as part of those dollars have been undersubscribed because of limitations on what it covers, and we have some ideas about how to broaden that. So more details on the specific recommendations around CalShape are in the brief. And then we had a new program this year, the Cal Fire Green Schoolyard Grants Program, which I'm sure many folks on the call are familiar with. These are grants to cities, counties, school districts, and nonprofit organizations for implementation and planning grants for green schoolyards, which we've heard a lot about today as an important solution to address extreme heat and ensure healthy outdoor places for children to play and learn. The 22-23 state budget included $117 million for this grant program, and in its first year, it fielded requests totaling more than $355 million, almost 3 times the demand for the dollars allocated to support greening efforts at 417 schools. The program was able to make grants that supported programming and planning at 180 schools. 180 schools. And California has over 10,000 public schools. So given what we're learning today and reminding ourselves about how to mitigate the dangers of extreme heat on schoolyards and school grounds, it's so important that we fund these kinds of programs to improve the resilience of our schools. And even in a tight budget year, the legislature might consider providing some bridge funding to keep this program active while we wait for resources that could become available in from an upcoming state, either climate bond or school infrastructure bond. Finally, the last recommendation, speaking of the bonds, the legislature will again be considering proposals for statewide bonds in 2024. There are 2 bills that contemplate significant investments to extend the state school facilities program and invest in school infrastructure. There's also a proposal for a climate bond focused on adaptation and resilience. First of all, we want to see these proposals move forward. We have a backlog of unfunded projects just the core resources that school districts rely on to operate, maintain, support, retrofit, healthy facilities. And we need to renew the school facilities program and make sure it's funded. And we also need to make sure that those dollars are getting to our highest need communities and students, and that they are aligned, they are invested in alignment with our climate goals. And then the climate bond proposal, has a focus on resilience and adaptation to extreme heat. Where better to focus our efforts than in schools, where a majority of California's young people spend more of their waking hours than any place else. And we should also say that within the funding for the master planning, funding for some of the technical assistance, all of those, both of those ideas could also be, should also be addressed and included and contemplated as part of these school infrastructure bond bills, particularly given the challenges around the broader budget context. So those are the ideas. There are other good ones out there, and we welcome conversation to keep kind of building big picture this conversation going forward into 2024. We invite you to download the full brief, Modest Investments, Lasting Returns. Maybe you can kind of tuck in for some cozy holiday reading. And the last pages of the brief also include some other resources, like say from the Legislative Analyst's Office. It has the link to Dr. Turner's briefs, to the report from Stanford and UC Berkeley earlier this year on climate resilient schools, a call to action. Where we are eager for others, to build on, collaborate with, and strengthen the specifics of these proposals. The big idea here as we head into a tough budget year is that we don't miss opportunities to invest in the spaces where our children are, which and where they learn. After all, the world becomes what we teach. Next slide. So, to wrap up, 2 invitations. Policymakers, we hope that you will reach out for conversations in January. Advocates, we hope that you will join the Climate Ready Schools Coalition if you have not already. And we want to close just with a reminder that, and we can go to the next slide, that the Californians want these changes. Strong majorities throughout the state are looking for schools to be engaged on climate and for action on local climate solutions. This is good politics. And these projects that we're talking about create and sustain good jobs throughout the state. So thank you for the opportunity to share this morning. Thank you for your leadership and engagement on these issues. And we look forward to the conversation and the work together in 2024.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. And we know that there's been some good questions coming in through the Q&A, so please definitely use that if you have some more questions. And I'm gonna be starting to ask our panelists some questions. So in fact, Stephanie, if you want to just close out for a minute on the slide deck so that people can see our panelists when they're talking, that would be awesome. And I want to go back to some of the information, Kelly, or Dr. Turner, that you were sharing, which is around understanding some of the data across the state. So one of the questions that we got was trying to understand, do heat effects persist in Northern California as strongly as Southern California? Does it differ between the regions? And are schools in areas that may be less prone to the heat, or do they also have heat remediation or air conditioning solutions that people could consider?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the heat world, we talk about 2 sorts of affected communities. There's those that have chronically hot conditions that are getting worse. So that would be like Southern California. And then there are some places that have what we call delta heat issues, which is that they're not used to or prepared for heat, but are experiencing these large spikes in extreme heat conditions, and the infrastructure is not ready for that. And so in some ways, from a public health perspective, those delta heat conditions are most concerning because children's bodies, workers' bodies, have not had a chance to kind of adapt to warmer conditions. And then I would also note that, like with climate change, we've seen, for instance, over 100 degrees because of the heat domes in Canada. So there's no place is really immune from this.
Great. I think that's really helpful to hear. And maybe just one more kind of follow-up that goes along with this. You shared some guidelines about it being too hot for in indoor classrooms. Are there any guidelines right now about when it's too hot to go out and exercise, particularly for children with special needs or with communication challenges?
Mhm. The State Department of Public Health just recently created their very first guidelines for safe outdoor play. And so we can dig up that link and share it with you. But that will depend quite a bit, depending on communities. So we don't have a hard number that we can say to you at this point, but I think this is a huge concern, particularly with high risk sensitive populations, as well as during PE, during recess, which now, by the way, the state just passed a law mandating 30 minutes of play every day for everyone. This could be all day long for some of the high population schools. Yeah, I would say that this is an area where we don't have a hard, fast rule, but we need one.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful to hear. Okay, Sarah, a question for you around IRA. So does the IRA provide 50% of the cost for all of the technologies you mentioned, or does it vary based on type? Like, for example, for more for heat pumps or less for solar?
Yeah, great question. It does vary by technology. So there's 3 different tax credits at work here. We have one tax credit, the investment tax credit, that's for your geo, your solar, and your energy storage. Gets more complicated from there. It's up to 50% off for geothermal or ground source heat pumps. It's up to 70% off for solar and energy storage. Those are in certain low-income communities. You can get that high. In general, though, these tax credits are not means tested. So any school, any actual commercial building owner, frankly, so we could be talking about district schools, we'd be talking about private schools, we would be talking about Head Start programs. I saw that question also. Really, any commercial building owner is eligible for these clean energy tax credits. It's just a few of these bonus adder bits that are means tested for certain communities. If you're talking about electric buses, there's a different formula for how you calculate the tax credits for electric buses, and also a slightly different formula for EV charging equipment. You can find out more information about the value of these different tax credits for these different technologies on our website. Jonathan just put in the chat the link to that part of our website that gets into all those gory details.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'm not sure, this might be more for Jonathan, or it could be for Sarah or Kelly. Many of you have mentioned DSA, and so that there might be some progress in removing barriers with DSA around shade structures or around some of these issues. Can anybody speak to streamlining processes with DSA or partnerships with DSA to simplify some of this?
I guess I would just offer that I think that our state architect, Ida Claire, and Eric Drever on her team are really committed to working with school districts around these issues. And I think that there has been some conversation about a working group, with the team at DSA in 2024 to kind of understand more about what the roadblocks and the barriers are and try to help school districts with that. So if that's something that you are working actively on, I think we'd love to, try to help get you plugged into that effort with the team at DSA. I think we've put Stephanie's email in. Maybe Stephanie, you could drop it again, but our program director at Undaunted can help kind of funnel people into that effort in 2024.
Okay, great. All right, let's see. Another question that's coming in, and maybe Jonathan, this might be for you, but or maybe also for the Luskin Center. How is this information being shared actively with school districts themselves? So this has been a policy forum that's aimed at policymakers, but what about the school districts? How do they hear about this, or how can we make them more aware?
You want to try, Kelly?
Sorry, can you restate the question? I'm responding to chat questions.
Oh yeah, I know.
sorry.
Sorry, it's a lot. It's busy. So the question is around like, so this is a policy forum that's really geared towards policymakers, but what can we do to get this information into the hands of school people who work on school grounds and educators, administrators, school board members? How do they hear about this type of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely communications tools like the ones that we've been working on, social media, all the various forums. I'd like to tell a story about I was doing some field data collection in a school in Pacoima, and they have been doing a lot of cool pavement action, but it's very clear to me that the science of that and how that works isn't really well understood by the kind of the folks that work. So they say, oh, we need this to make us feel cooler. But in fact, that's not going to make them feel cooler. It's going to make the surface feel cooler. So there's just an amount of literacy about the complicated nature of heat that folks like me and academia need to do a better job explaining to everyone out there.
I would also just add that, folks on the call are likely members of different associations. If you're members of either your labor organizations, the school boards association, the superintendents association, like all of these different, associations and collectives in the education sector, they go through priority setting processes and their membership organizations. And so I think it's really important that we are active in the networks that we're in, asking people to agendize these issues and make sure that we are kind of leveraging those communication networks to share the information. Because there is right now no one place where we can just, click send and everybody has the information. It's really kind of a grassroots effort to just get it out however we can.
Great. So Sara, I know at Undaunted K-12, you have this national kind of lens on this work, and I'm curious, California is often seen as a leader in these spaces, but what is going on in other states and what could we learn from other states?
Yeah, it's interesting. We are active in a number of different states, and we've seen, and this is all new, right? So this is new territory for states and districts to be able to think about, how do we make the most of this next decade? And so I can share just kind of the variety of techniques that we've been seeing states engage with us on, which is we've been really excited and honored to work on. Some of what states can do is do awareness building around these opportunities. These tax credits are available directly from districts to go to the IRS, to install these clean energy machines and go to the IRS and get their money. So we don't necessarily need the state. The state is not in that transaction, and yet the state can play an enormously powerful role in building awareness. So in other states, we've been part of forums where the state uses its convening authority to bring district leaders, to bring, the private sector construction folks who are building and improving our schools, bring them to the table so that we can all learn about this new thing called the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's one piece, kind of awareness building. Another piece is that we know that we have massive inequities in our school infrastructure, and not all school buildings are starting from the same place. Many school buildings are not even near the starting line for things like electrification and installing heat pumps. So part of the conversation also has to be around what's the extra work that we do to help bring our school buildings that have suffered historical underinvestment, to the starting line so they can take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And then a third piece that we hear kind of the most advanced thinking from states is, how do we help districts? And again, this is likely to be especially our low wealth, districts and low wealth communities. How do we help them take advantage of these tax credits? Because they are reimbursements. So we need ways to help districts pay for, cover the cost of scoping these projects, having the local funds to get these projects started so that they can then get reimbursed, from the IRS. So I think that's another part of the conversation that states are grappling with is, how do we use these federal dollars to really justify a state level and an enhanced state investment in school facilities and or help local communities raise local funds so that they can take down these federal dollars. Jonathan, is there anything you would add on there in terms of states?
No, that was great.
Great.
Okay, great. So maybe just one last question here before we wrap up, but this is an interesting one. So With the news yesterday that students are suing the EPA in California, the question came in around how do grassroots level constituents like students and teachers get involved in this policy space? Like, what is the role that students and teachers can really play in policy change so that they can advocate to protect themselves? And that could be for any. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, just to give an example, like SB 394, the bill calling for a statewide master plan for healthy, sustainable, climate resilient school infrastructure, thousands of teachers and young people across the state signed letters to the governor asking him to sign that bill. So I do think that through sort of statewide partners, there are real opportunities for like those letters matter. They get young people into rooms in Sacramento. We had young people testifying, in Sacramento in committees, and it is silent when a young person goes to the mic or a teacher goes to the mic to share about their experience. And it's a big lift to get yourself to Sacramento from all over the state. And in addition, like school boards, local communities are making decisions today. So we have school districts that have policy commitments to shade. We have school districts that have policy commitments to decarb, but we also have hundreds that don't. And so young people and educators and families, parents, and caregivers have a huge role to play in the local decision making that can both impact local decisions and drive what's happening at the state level.
As I'm a little bit biased as somebody who comes from the research world, but I think that data can speak volumes. And I think I completely agree that when I've seen students testify, their voice matters a lot. One of the things we've done in some of our like mobile home communities is have folks get really low cost thermometers, stick them in their homes and show that it's hotter than it is outside when they're inside. Why couldn't we give these to students as science projects? Right. And then, have some sort of data driven, like, look, not only do I feel hot, but I've got the data to show it. I don't know, just thinking outside the box about how we leverage data and communicate it.
Great. Awesome. Well, I appreciate all of you so much for answering these questions. Any last comments for any of our panelists that you just wanted to make for the audience?
Only that just like a quick scan of all of the names and who is on this call, just a huge appreciation for people for taking time to like listen and engage with us about how we're thinking about this, and just grateful for all the leadership and energy on this issue today, and look forward to working together in the months and weeks and year to come.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Dr. Turner, thank you so much for your great research and for elevating that and for the great infographics. These are going to be really awesome for people to be able to leverage. Sarah, thank you so much for the high level but detailed still information about IRA. I know that was really helpful. And Jonathan, thank you for all that time that you shared of what we can do here to advocate, and specifically in this year, these 5 major points, and for people to really join us in that. I did put a note in the chat box that there were so many questions that came in about the schoolyard forest and trees. And so I'm pointing folks to resources for that and upcoming webinars that Green Schoolyards America might be hosting on that. So thank you again for your time. This recording will be posted and be sent out to all the folks who registered, and also the slide deck. So have a great rest of your winter holiday season. And thank you all so much for attending today.
Thank you, Andrea.